The purpose of this hearing is to shine a light on the challenges that Americans face in meeting their basic human needs. We will hear from people who experience these challenges firsthand and whose lives are directly impacted by the decisions and policies made in Washington. That's not to say that the federal government isn't already playing an important role in the lives of American families working their way up the economic ladder. Critical investments in federal programs have kept millions of Americans above the poverty line and have cut the poverty rate nearly in half over the last 50 years. Medicaid and CHIP provide health coverage to 73 million Americans, including more than 1 in 3 children. To date, 33 states and the District of Columbia have expanded their Medicaid programs to low-income working-age adults, helping to bring the nation's uninsured rate to a record low. The Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, provides nutrition assistance to nearly 43 million Americans each month, including 1.4 million veterans. The Child Care and Development Block Grant supported nearly 800,000 families, ensuring children were cared for while parents worked to put food on the table. The Earned Income Tax Credit has lifted millions of workers out of poverty instead of being taxed into it. And in 2017, more than 5 million households received assistance with heating and cooling costs through the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, helping families stay safe and healthy. But we need to be doing far more, not less. For decades, efforts in Washington to close the gap between ongoing efforts to fight poverty and what is needed to fully address this crisis have been inadequate. But now these programs and the millions they serve are under constant attack. Rather than increasing investments in evidence-based programs that help more struggling Americans get ahead, the administration is proposing to change the way they measure the poverty rate in a backdoor attempt to cut off vital aid to potentially millions of Americans. There have also been consistent attempts by states to impose so-called work requirements on Medicaid recipients that only serve to deny health care to people. The governor of my home state, by his own admission, said his Medicaid waiver request will take potentially life-saving health care coverage away from more than 90,000 Kentuckians. And the Trump administration hasn't stopped there. They've rescinded regulations on payday loan lenders that prey on those in poverty, proposed cuts of $220 billion to SNAP, and sought to eliminate LIHEAP.
So what has paved a pathway out of poverty for low-income Americans? I believe a strong economy, which creates more opportunities to find a job, earn a paycheck, get ahead. Following historic tax cuts and deregulation, families are seeing more jobs. They're seeing bigger paychecks, with average hourly earnings increasing by more than 3%. And the unemployment rate has dropped to 3.6%, its lowest level in a half century. We should be focused on policies that continue this trend and help more people earn their own success, including linking more anti-poverty programs to employment opportunities. Serving our country has also paved a pathway out of poverty for many Americans. They've been given an education, learned skills that are applicable to business and other fields. They have learned leadership skills and the value of working in teams. As someone who spent 30 years in uniform in the Arkansas National Guard, and as someone who chairs the Board of Visitors at the United States Military Academy at West Point, I have seen firsthand how our military has helped improve the lives of young men and women from challenging circumstances. And I know I'm not alone. There are 7 veterans and 1 member currently serving on this committee, 5, including myself, on our side of the aisle, 3 on the Democrat side. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank them for their service. Perhaps we can explore this notion of service for individuals and the opportunities made available later in life by the U.S. military as just one component of an anti-poverty program that I think that works.
Whenever I'd work at my grandparents' farm, in order to wash my hands after working cattle or picking up rocks, clearing brush, to wash my hands, I had to pump water out of a cistern. My grandparents never had running water. They died not having running water. So I understand what poverty is all about. More than 20 of my 30 counties are persistent poverty counties in the 8th Congressional District. It's a very impoverished area. But you know what my family always taught me? My father was a minister. My parents showed a lot of love. They've been married for more than 55 years. But they taught me that hard work and determination And support from your family can do a lot. And a lot can happen from a family that had nothing.
There is a lot of institutionalized, there are a lot of institutionalized issues that we have to deal with as a country. Congress can't deal with all of them. But the fact remains that we have an obligation. I always say government's the way we recognize our we organize our responsibilities to each other. And one of those responsibilities is to understand that we have a capitalistic system that ends up with winners and losers, and the losers are not necessarily losers because they didn't try hard, because they weren't talented. They were losers because there are naturally winners and losers in society. And it's the government's obligation to make sure we do everything we can to make sure they have a decent standard of living, and then give them the support to rise out of poverty and become winners at all levels.
This is a really, really important hearing because the issue of poverty in America is very real. I know because I've got some personal experience with it. And I know many of you are going to look up here and say, yeah, right, okay? But let me give you a little bit of my background. I was born on a two-wheel wagon rut mule farm. We had no indoor plumbing. We cooked and heated on two big old black pot-bellied stoves. We farmed with mules up until I was about 13 years old. We went to the store once a month, and that was to get sugar and salt if we had the money to do it. Everything else came from the sweat of our brow and the toil of our hands in growing and raising what we consumed. My mother worked 3 or 4 jobs, picking cotton, picking tobacco, working on produce farms, you name it. We didn't know we were poor. We thought we lived like everybody else did in the community in which we were raised. Mother had to find a way to take care of 2 kids. So she lied about my age. Mom's dead now, so I can say that. You can't go after her. But she lied about my age to start me to school when I was 5 years old. And because my dad was an alcoholic and she had to jump from place to place to try to find a job because he wasn't providing much input, we were all over the place. 13 schools in 12 years. So education was a big, big problem for me. I didn't get a very good one in elementary school and middle school and high school. And thank God that I lived in a country that helped provide some opportunities. I see a lot of testimony here about Christian principles. We got 2 reverends, 2 pastors, and a lot of people with Jesus signs on their shirts. I've been a Christian since I was 10 years old. And I'm going to tell you, the scriptures that I read, one of the problems that we've got in this country, it's not a head problem, folks, it's a heart problem. Oh, yeah. Because I don't find anywhere in the scripture where Jesus said that it was Caesar's job to feed the poor and to clothe the widows and to take care of the orphans. He said it was the church's. It's the church's responsibility. It's the community's responsibility. It's your neighbor's responsibility. It's your responsibility as a neighbor.
And from a moral perspective, a Christian perspective, poverty, housing, treating the immigrants right, are the values of faith. They are the values. I'm a pastor. I didn't want to talk like this, but since I'm a pastor, I've been a pastor over 30 years. I have 500 years of ministry in my family as pastor. Our church has built homes for low, moderate income people. We house senior citizens. We have programs for the poor. But pastors also must be prophets, like Jesus was, and challenge the system. And all the homes we've built has nothing to do with people not getting a living wage. That's a government policy. And I just want to say it to this committee again and to people here. Slavery was a government policy. The lack of civil rights was a government policy. The lack of living wages is a government policy. The lack of housing is a government policy. So to say government is bad is ridiculous. We are here in the government. What the problem is when you have a government that pushes for the few and caters to Wall Street and caters to the greedy and does not care for we, the people. And to suggest that 43.5 million people 43% of this country, 140 million people, I'm gonna keep saying it like a broken record, that if they just loved and got charity from the church when the government created the poverty, then you're gonna ask the church to fix the poverty? No. The church should be challenging the government, just like we challenge the government over slavery, just like we challenge the government over the lack of women's right to vote, just like we challenge the government over civil rights. We should be prophetic and challenge for a policy shift that could lift people. And to not do that is at best theological malpractice, at worst is heresy. You know, I come from somebody who, and the people here who remember, who know that we were deeply impacted by government, by Caesar, if you will. And it took religious people who had to stand up to Caesar when Caesar said separate but equal. There wasn't but one dissenter, Justice Holland out of Eastern Kentucky, that stood up to that, but he stood up. And because he stood up, he eventually brought other people to his position, and we won. Somebody has to stand up to the lies. I've heard so many distortions here today, it actually hurts my head. I mean, to suggest that these people who work hard, we all have to tell our stories and our children, but to somebody to say, well, Jesus never said anything about Caesar. First of all, it's interesting that you all would define yourself as Caesar. That in itself is kind of strange. I mean, we need to stop for a minute to even hear that.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is that you haven't read the 2,000 scriptures in the Bible that talk about how societies have supposed to treat the poor, the immigrant, the least of these, and left out. And you don't know that Jesus started his first sermon with good news to the Patokos. That's a Greek word which means those who have been made poor by economic systems. I mean, it really is shocking that folk are saying the same thing that we heard people say about slavery. Slaves just work hard and wait. Civil rights, we don't need to be involved, just work hard and wait. Social Security, you know, same people are against Social Security, and they say God was against it. It is bothersome that in the 21st century, we still have these weak, tired old mythologies lying about the war on poverty when the Russell Sage Foundation actually says that it did decrease poverty, but we left the field. So I would say to all of us, Democrats and Republicans, we brought you people, Republicans, Democrats, whites and black. See the people. Stop just talking about I know poverty and hear what these folk are saying and put together a full plan to deal with this issue. This is traumatic to see this happening in America today, that people would stick with their partisan line and ignore the people that are really hurting. I was actually looking at the ranking member state in Arkansas. I just thought I'd look at Arkansas. I think this is Arkansas. It says that in Arkansas, 46% of people in Arkansas are poor and low income. 493,000 of them are black, but 863,000 of them are white. Now, all of those folk are not poor because they don't work hard enough. To have an anecdotal evidence about people working hard enough, they're actually proving our point. People shouldn't have to work 3 jobs. That's the point. People shouldn't work without health care. That's the point. Sure. People shouldn't have to pray to wait for food to come on their table. That's the point. If you're working, you should be making a living wage. You should have health care in the richest nation in the world. Every one of you that come into this chamber, one of the first things you get is free health care because we pay for it. We pay for it. You make sure that, for instance, you have the ability to all your pre-clearance. This lady didn't have that chance.
No.
She didn't have that chance. And so what we've put together for you is an agenda.
And we are here to say this morning that our nation's budget, as it now stands, reflects the values of the rich, of large corporations, of military contractors at the expense of poor, suffering children, families. We are here to say that we need a moral revolution of values that places the needs and demands of the poor and of the planet at the heart of the budget. This will create more jobs, build up our infrastructure, strengthen our economy, and protect our resources today and for future generations. When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. So I know this from economics and social science. I've also read it in the Bible. Deuteronomy says, if you forgive debts and you increase programs that lift up the poor, if you pay your workers a living wage and you release those who are oppressed, if you lend out money knowing you may not get paid back, your whole society will be lifted up. Your whole nation will flourish. Poverty is people's creation. It is the creation of immoral budgets and unjust policies, and we can choose to end it. The poor will only be with us as long as we are disobedient to God and to the founding creed of this nation.
Some people say us young people are lazy, but that's not true. Johnstown just doesn't have enough jobs to pay, not enough jobs that pay to live on. I am on disability and Medicaid, and I'm grateful for the help that I get, but it's not enough to get by. And last year, out of nowhere, my benefits for food stamps got cut down to $15 a month. I have tried asking why this was and can never get an answer from anybody. At the grocery store, I sometimes have to put food back or add the charge to my credit card debt because I don't have the cash. What's going to happen when all of my credit card debt is maxed out and still don't have the cash?
No parent should live with the fear of having their children be taken away from them. I sometimes have that fear that immigration officers might come and take me away, and that my child will be ripped from my arms. I fight for the day when no child has to worry about clean water, a good education, or health care. As members of the Budget Committee, you have tremendous power to shift U.S. priorities in ways that it would help 140 million poor and low-income people and for them to have better lives. You could decide, for example, that it is more important to put children into Head Start than into detention centers. Last year, one of the corporations that operate detention centers got $234 million to buy beds for children. With that money, you could have funded Head Start for more than 26,000 children. One policy gives children lifelong benefits, the other one destroys lives. In fact, we've had 5 children die in detention centers this year. Thousands are being traumatized in the way that our community is coping through making survival methods. I mean, we literally have to organize ourselves in a way that we are protecting our community and protecting ourselves. And like I said before, in Unión de Vecinos, there's times where our government even tells us that they don't have money to cover potholes. What our community is doing, they fundraise for cement and cover our own potholes. There are times where we are told that there's no lighting for our alleys, and what we are doing is that we are go to Home Depot and buy the solar panels with lighting and install them ourselves. These are the things that our community has to resource to because there is a lack of will within our government to resolve issues that are very basic. The fact that we have to go to our community members when there's someone in need and say, hey, do you have a tomato? Do you have a potato? Do you have some chicken so we can put a basket together for this family that it's in need? It's something that we have to resource to. And it's true, there are churches that do lend a helping hand. There are churches that are giving food out on Sundays because they understand that there's a need for hunger in their communities, but they also understand that they need to push the government to do more. Public housing is very important. People living in public housing are
Decent public
housing are only paying 30% of their income into homes. People who are paying market rate rent today are paying 60 to 70% of their income into housing.
Absolutely.
That means that sometimes we have to stay up at night figuring out what bill we pay, if we can buy milk for our children, and if we are going to be able to pay our rent. That's what we need. We need to be able to pay only 30% of our income into housing.
I was an aircraft mechanic in the Air Force National Guard. I was based at Forbes Field in Topeka, Kansas from 2002 to 2011. I worked on the KC-135 aircraft, the airplane that refuels other planes in the air, and I deployed to Turkey and Qatar during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Neither of these countries will likely recover from that devastation in my lifetime. Nothing I can do in my life will make up for the hundreds of thousands of Iraqi and Afghan men, women, and children killed in these useless wars. Since our invasion of these countries, terrorism has proliferated tenfold around the world. When I joined the military, I had no idea that never in its history has the Department of Defense done an internal audit of its spending, despite it being mandated by law. It doesn't know how much money it is spending, and it doesn't know how it is spending it. It's a black hole for money. A 2016 Inspector General's report revealed that over the past 2 decades, the Pentagon cannot account for how it spent $6.5 trillion. The Pentagon budget routinely accounts for over half of the federal discretionary budget. It is no secret that there is always enough money for weapons and jails and never enough for education and the poor. Instead of this money going to health care and education for our citizens who so desperately need it, it goes to Boeing, it goes to Lockheed Martin, it goes to Raytheon, it goes to Northrop Grumman, and the list goes on and on and on. And Mr. Womack, I appreciate your comments about getting job skills from the military. I am very grateful for getting my education and my skills as a mechanic and the mentorship I received from the great people in the military. But we do not have to use systems of violence and brutality to try and alleviate poverty here at home.
How much would you pay to have your baby saved? You got a dollar sign right on top of your head, a number? How much would you pay? It's because Venus should be here. She should not. I should not be here. So since she's not here, I'm here for her, and I'm here for the other 140 million people that are struggling and bearing out babies because they don't have health care insurance, something that we shouldn't even have to ask for. We shouldn't have to ask for this. Something that you wouldn't even take this job if you couldn't get. We shouldn't have to ask for this. It's a human right. We shouldn't be bearing our babies like this.